All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second annual Aquinas Lecture. And the Aquinas Lecture here in Aquinas Hall was begun last year when we had Father Reginald Lynch come in during the Eucharistic Revival year. And part of the reason for this lecture is to help continue the legacy of Aquinas High School. For many years to come, our hope is that having a guest Dominican friar, scholar, to come in and talk on a topic. You hear enough from us that live here during our adult catechesis classes, so we were thinking that an annual lecture in honor of St. Thomas Aquinas, whose traditional feast day is March 7th. So actually, we're going to try to keep it every year in this time of the winter around the traditional feast of St. Thomas Aquinas, as a way to, first of all, remember the great legacy of the angelic doctor, but also of Aquinas High School, and to bring in a guest lecture. And we are so honored tonight to have Father Basil Cole, OP, S.T.D, S.T.M. I'm going to tell you what that's about. Father Basil is a native of San Francisco. He has his doctorate from the Angelicum, and he has taught and written for many years on moral theology. He taught at St. Albert's College in Oakland, the House of Studies for the Western Province. He taught at the Angelicum. He taught at the Dominican House of Studies in Washington. I had him for a number of courses. I think a number of the friars here had him. He's written extensively, and somehow he still finds time for parish missions in the midst of all of that. But last year, Father Basil received the Master of Sacred Theology, the S.T.M, which is the highest degree bestowed by the order on one of our brothers, given to a scholar of distinction for his many years of teaching and scholarship. And Father Basil has written so much. You've written on what the hidden enemies of the priesthood and music and morality, and you may have even seen some of his articles in some publications. So we are very blessed and honored to have him here tonight for the second Aquinas lecture. For a topic, pull the plug. It's a waste of money. We were hoping that that might draw some people in. So without further ado, let us welcome Father Basil Cole.
Well, good evening. Let's begin with a prayer first. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. Mary and Joseph, St. Thomas Aquinas. About 30 some odd years ago, when Father Carlton Jones was your pastor, you probably don't remember him, he had me give 3 Holy Week missions here in the parish. And so the last time I was here was, as they say, in the 90s sometimes. And this is the first time in 30 some odd years. I had a great, wonderful, wonderful missions. They were just great. My mom and dad were medical people. Mom was a nurse and dad was a pharmacist. And something rubbed off on me, and I wound up many years later teaching Catholic moral theology, Catholic social, medical moral theology. And so the title for this evening revolves around the question of end-of-life issues. It's a very, very difficult subject, concretely, not so much abstractly. And unfortunately, I'm not infallible. And I try to follow the teaching of the church as best as I can. And then sometimes I make mistakes, but that's the way things go. So let me begin this particular conference. I've written it out, and I'll try to occasionally intervene with a thing. And then when I'm through, then we'll have some questions and answers and maybe some arguments, and maybe you won't agree with me. That's fine. I'm not the Pope. I'm not the bishop. I'm just a simple Dominican friar. So let's start first. Plato, Aristotle, Hippocrates, and his oath for doctors, the early church fathers, medieval modern theologians, all commented in their lifetime upon medical questions when these difficulties related to the morality of life and death issues. Philosophers and theologians did not call their thinking bioethics as we do today, however, until the later part of the 20th century. Purely ethical thinking, by right reason alone, is based largely upon many different branches of philosophy. Bioethics, then, is reasoning about the beginning of life, middle section of life, and the end of biological life, together with serious thought about particular medical interventions on the body of the human person. Is it right? Is it wrong? And why, if we possibly can know? What specially distinguishes Catholic bioethics, however, from secular bioethics is that Catholic bioethics is medical moral theology, based not only on reason, but also on faith, with important subordination to the lights of the teaching of the universal church. While many biomoral theologians can use revelation to help them in the quest for truth relative to moral norms on health issues, especially concerning innocent life issues, still many questions remain perplexing. Two different opinions. Church saying nothing possible. We'll go into a little bit of that. This is in part because revelation, tradition, and the sacred magisterium generally says nothing or almost nothing about newer issues of a medical nature or solutions to appraise the moral goodness or moral evil of some newer problems posed in this overall issue of health care. It was our dear father and St. Thomas Aquinas who taught that first principles of moral knowledge are in all of humankind. Lesser known principles are known after some experience. And there's a third category of moral knowledge only known to the wise. And several of these issues are found in medical moral theology. In our current inquiries, we have to strive to the highest degree of moral certitude in order to advance the science of medical moral theology, or what is also called Catholic bioethics. But it's more than ethics, it's more than reason. It's reason and faith. Okay. The root principles of medical moral theology come from a branch of theology called fundamental moral theology. Before you even begin to think about medical issues. Okay, come on. Based largely found in the Prima Secundae of the Summa of St. Thomas Aquinas, the theologian first takes the notion of the fact that there are three sources of a good moral human act. The object of the act, what are you trying to do here? What's going on here? Circumstances surrounding the act. Are they good ones, bad ones? It might be a good act, but in a particular circumstance, it may not be a good act. No? And then the intention or motive of what you're trying to do, morally speaking. Secondly, the theologian applies what's called the principle of totality, which I'll explain, the Thomistic analysis of the mutilation or removal of body parts when necessary. You go into the operating table, you've got cancer of the nose, chop, chop. you know. I mean, you got a cancer in the arm, you might have to go chop, chop, okay? You're removing something, moving a body part. It's also called today, in a more modern way, called the principle of therapeuticity. Well, this is a therapeutic intervention for the sake of the whole body. If I've got cancer on the nose and I do nothing about it, it kills me. I don't want to have my nose chopped off, but on the other hand, I want to live, you know, and I have important things I have to do to live, you see? So I, got to keep that in mind. In either event, the principle considers it's morally reasonable, lawful, licit to remove a part of a body for the sake of the whole body, meaning for the sake of the physical health of the human person, with proper consent, either from the person himself or the health care agent, like if you've left a will for your health care, which I hope you have. If something goes haywire and you may not be all there upstairs, you want to assign somebody who will kind of make a decision for you about a particular care that you need, see? Because you won't be able to do so. You suffer a heart attack, you get a stroke, and you're going, well, you need somebody to stand in for you, and that's why everybody has to have somebody along those lines. Okay. St. Thomas Aquinas started this whole process of thinking in the following manner in the Secunda Secundae of the Summa, question 65, article 1. And you don't have to be a genius to understand it. It's pretty clear. I'll read it to you. Moreover, an organ that is endangering an individual's whole body may legitimately be removed by his own consent for the sake of the well-being of the body as a whole. Why? Since each person is responsible for the well-being of his body as a whole. Assuming you're conscious, assuming you can make a decision. Again, that's why you have to have a second person to stand in for you if you go boop, 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 And the same reasoning applies, he says, or it's somebody else's responsibility to look after the person with the infected organ. Parents, especially children, husband with wife, wife with husband, and then maybe you're 75 years old, and well, you might have a relative nearby or a friend nearby. Okay. In any other case, then, it's quite wrong to mutilate a person. I can't just say to the doctor, I don't like the way my ear looks, chop it off. Well, it's healthy. It's for the good of my body. I don't like the way my hands are. I want new hands, so give me a new pair of hands. Well, that means I got to take these off. Well, I mean, it's absurd, of course. I'm just giving you absurd examples to kind of show you how important this principle of totality is. Always, the part is for the sake of the whole, all right? It was, however, a number of centuries after St. Thomas before the full meaning of this or other smaller texts of Aquinas could aid Catholic medical moral theologians. For centuries, however, it was impossible to donate an organ to another, like a kidney. But once it became possible in the later 20th century, at first it was difficult for theologians to explain why this procedure was permissible. And this difficulty extended even to the issue of explaining the morality of donating blood. If the blood is me, and that's me, how can I take away me? See, it seems to violate the part for the whole. I need the blood to live, It was a difficult problem in 1919 for theologians. It wasn't until the 30s that somebody came up with a decent solution, and then eventually the Mother Church accepted the whole thing. Later Dominicans, and also in St. Thomas's time, if somebody ran over your leg, to have it cut off would be almost impossible. You'd be in excruciating pain. And it took a number of years for ordinary people to figure out, well, if you drink a bottle of scotch, that'll knock you out and you can take the leg off, And then eventually ether and gas, new modern ways of putting you under were developed. But in St. Thomas's time, it didn't exist, You might just have to grin and bear it. Later, Dominican theologians after St. Thomas, who you may or may not know, Debanyes, Victoria, Soto, introduced additional principles from fundamental moral theology, including the important distinction between, this is very important, ordinary and extraordinary means of health care. Ordinary, extraordinary. Well, that's simple, you think. Well, not necessarily. I'm just speaking abstractly now. For what may be ordinary for Father over there may be extraordinary for me at the age of 88, Yeah. So we got to be careful here. No one size doesn't fit all. And what may be ordinary for a healthy person may not be ordinary for somebody who's got 4 or 5 other problems, even though he's only 45 or 46. You see, I'm speaking abstractly. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nurse. Okay. Now, the distinction between ordinary, extraordinary means of health care takes into consideration burdens such as pain, burdens such as expenses, burdens such as who's going to take care of me, burdens such as do I have to go to San Francisco to get cured? That can be a very heavy burden. Follow me? Okay. Certain kinds of medical operations, the role of pain management, financial capabilities can go into the mix of making a decision what to do, morally speaking, when the old health deteriorates. Now, being 88, when my health deteriorates, it's different from a 42-year-old whose health deteriorates, generally speaking, because I'm ready to go. But it may very well be that certain things will change because I'm closer to the end, okay? Even though I might feel good, feel healthy, all that stuff. So there's a lot of what we call prudential thinking that has to go on here. Remember the old phrase you learned in going to shopping for a suit. One size does not fit all. What's good for one person may not be good for another person. You have to look at the consequences of what's to happen. And that takes a brain. It's called the virtue of, in this case, medical moral prudence when it comes to these issues. Okay. These distinctions are incorporated in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Do you have one? If it's got dust on it, go to 2278 and 2279. You'll be able to find a number of things that are helpful. And so today, Mother Church teaches that discontinuing treatment that is disproportionate is not killing a patient, but accepting the inability to stop death from ensuing. And again, that requires a little pea brain up there. Yes, your son is dying. Well, when will he die? Oh, in about 8 months. Well, that's quite different from saying your son will die in 2 hours, or 2 days, or 5 days, or a week, or a month. And that has to be weighed in terms of care that will take care of him while he's going through the death process. Just because he's going to die in 8 months, you don't all of a sudden yank the plug out. You're always going to be dead. Okay, phew. You can't start death. You can't hurry death directly. That's going against common sense fifth commandment. Thou shalt not kill. We'll see there's another distinction coming. However, this doesn't mean stopping all ordinary comfort care when it seems to be extraordinary, disproportionate, such as food and drink, and other means that are not burdensome to the patient. What's burdensome for you may not be burdensome for you. So there's a certain relativity here that your old brain has to kind of figure out, Here, let's give you a little something to eat here, and then he starts vomiting like mad. See? Well, then let's find something that they can take. See, it's kind of it's relative to what's helpful. That's why sometimes tube feeding is inserted, or also why a simple feeding by the needle with the nutrients hanging up above is given, sometimes for a temporary time. All right. Secondly, beginning in the 1980s, there was a great dispute among theologians concerning persons who are in the persistent vegetative state. Persistent vegetative state. PVS for short. Unconscious for over 1 or 2 years. Today, sometimes some doctors will say in some hospitals, if a person gets a major heart attack or a major stroke and he's out of it, well, they say he's brain dead. Well, careful. It's not easy to know if a brain is fully dead in the first place, and every state has its own rules and regulations. You can be declared brain dead in Los Angeles and perfectly alive in Boston. And that's true throughout the country. You got to be a little concerned about states making these decisions, etc. Okay, and then persistent vegetative state is something that goes much longer. And sometimes after 2 years, one day, they wake up. Where have I been? What's going on? It happens. Does it happen every day? No. But sometimes consciousness is raised after a certain period, especially among the doctors in the Netherlands and other places. I've seen examples where they were able to resuscitate a number of these people, but that's going too far. Some have claimed that they're imminently dying, those of the persistent vegetative state. Because why? One of the reasons offered, because they can't chew food. Furthermore, they can't achieve the purpose of their life here and now. So they should be left to die as comfortably as possible. Red flag on the field. That isn't quite so. You can't treat people that are debilitated as if they're vegetables. That's the problem with that phrase, the vegetative state. But that's so common now in many circles. Others have claimed that these persons are human beings who have a right to life, should be fed maybe with a tube, which by its nature is not a medical procedure, nor does it entail great cost or difficulty, all things being equal, with some exceptions here and there. In 2004, St. John Paul II gave a short intervention that year at a conference in which he agreed with the latter position in principle, namely, that if a feeding tube were to be withdrawn, and without any great burden being present, an act of euthanasia, objectively speaking, was taking place. That's why the Catechism into 277 will say an action that is of itself that causes death directly is morally wrong. I happen to have been there at that particular intervention that the Pope made. By accident, I happened to be in Rome, and there I was listening to him talk. Unfortunately, it was translated. It was in Italian at the time, and my Italian is the pits. Okay. All right, let's go on now. There's more. Some conclusions of Mother Church are guideposts for Catholic medical moral teaching based on the notion, first, innocent human life cannot be directly taken by anyone, whether at the beginning or at the end of life. Notice, very important phrase, directly taken, as distinct from indirectly taken. That happens as a consequence of doing something good that might indirectly lead to death. These theological principles and reasoned conclusions were simply not solemnly defined by St. John Paul II in his encyclical letter Evangelium Vitae. You can have two kinds of infallible teachings of the Church: solemn definitions of councils, solemn definitions of a pope. We've only got two solemn definitions of a pope, as far as I know, and that was the notion of original sin, and the notion by Pius IX, Blessed Pius IX, and the notion of the Immaculate Conception defined by Pope Pius XII, Venerable Pope Pius XII. Two extraordinary interventions. But there's the ordinary infallibility that comes place, and that means that something has always been taught, and the mind of the Pope is that this is certain. This is what John Paul had said. Therefore, by the authority which Christ conferred upon Peter and his successors, and in communion with the bishops of the Catholic Church, I confirm that the direct and voluntary killing of an innocent human being is always gravely immoral. It's an absolute. Okay? This doctrine, based on that unwritten law which man, in the light of reason, finds in his own heart, Romans 2:14-15, is reaffirmed by sacred scripture, transmitted by the tradition of the Church, and taught by the ordinary and universal magisterium of the Church. Okay? So that this is not just simply his opinion now. He's speaking as the head of the Catholic Church, not with a solemn definition, but with an ordinary definition, infallible. Then again, starting the same way in paragraph 62, I declare that direct abortion, that is, abortion willed as an end or a means, always constitutes a grave moral disorder. Why? Since it is the deliberate killing of an innocent human being. This doctrine is based upon natural law, written law of God, transmitted by the Church's tradition, taught by the ordinary and universal magisterium, which isn't just simply the Pope alone. The Pope, the bishops that have been teaching it for centuries or for years. Third, paragraph 65, I confirm euthanasia is a grave violation of the law of God, since it is the deliberate and morally unacceptable killing of a human person. Okay? Now, there's two ways of cooperating in doing any evil deed. There's what we call an important principle of formal cooperator, who does all these things. And then there's the secondary cooperator who assists the formal cooperator. And then there are people who have some relationship to immoral things, but they don't immediately contribute to a particularly immoral act. They are somehow involved in an overall situation, like janitors working in a hospital, that practices abortion, people who have to be typists or something of that sort. That presents other problems. We can't go into that right now. Now, another important principle that goes into understanding end-of-life issues, too, in addition to the principle of totality, in addition to those teachings of Mother Church that we just outlined, the principle of double effect. It comes into play in medical moral questions, again derived from St. Thomas's thinking concerning the halting of personal violence. In these instances, it may be a case that a perpetrator is killed, but it's not the intention of the person defending himself. Rather, it's the intention is the cessation of the attack. Therefore, the action which causes the death is considered beside the intention. This is what I'm doing, and somehow over here something deleterious happens. But I don't cause that. The particular situation here has as an outcome that this happens. That can be morally good, that can be morally wrong, depending upon what particular aspect we're talking about. Okay? Therefore, an action that caused the death beside the intention is also called per accidens. You're in a war. You're dropping bombs on a factory that builds atomic warfare, or that builds tanks, or that builds machine guns in a factory. You got to bomb those things out to save your boys. There might be innocent people in there. They might be killed. They're working in the factories. They're not guilty of anything. They might be forced into doing it. You don't intend to kill them. The bomb does. You're trying to get rid of those horrible instruments that will kill your troops in order to be able to win, hopefully, a justifiable war. A theologian named Jean Gary later developed this thought and arrived that there were 4 conditions for using the principle of double effect. And the first principle of the double effect is that the action of itself must be good or at least indifferent. And the evil effect that must be proportionate to the good outcome. The good effect must not be directly caused by a morally evil effect. And the intention must not be to will physically, theologically, the evil effect. Your intention is to will a certain good to take place. Okay. Let's go on. Another principle that we have to take into consideration when we're dealing with these issues, some actions are always and everywhere morally evil, no matter what you intend, no matter what your intentions are. You might be the most intense intention to do the best thing possible. The encyclicals of Pope John Paul II, Evangelium Vitae and Veritatis Splendor, give several lists that help in determining what can be done under the principle of double effect. Most other terms and norms are positive precepts that oblige in a general way, not always here and now, because of special circumstances. So, for example, a married couple have a positive obligation to have children, yet undue circumstances may not permit them to engage in marital intercourse during fertile periods. They're open to life, but a woman's reproductive cycle, when infertile, doesn't permit her to have human life, so they can take advantage of that time and have authentic conjugal intercourse. We call that natural family planning. All right, now we get closer to our issue here. reconstructing the human body and its functions is not terribly problematic unless it's done for purely vain purposes. Now, however, with organ transplants and the principle of totality entails the issue of what harms, what does not harm one's personal integrity. Obviously, giving away one eye damages your ability to see. Giving away one lung damages your ability to stay alive. It's an act of charity, though, to take a reasonable and a remote risk of donating a particular paired organ to save the life of a brother or a sister. For example, kidneys. One kidney will suffice to keep us alive, and so, all things being equal, one could donate this kidney, given the correct blood type and going through other major tests and examinations, and then prudence dictates it will work, and then there's nothing wrong with doing a thing like that. The Catechism of the Catholic Church speaks eloquently about this generous gift as both a meritorious action and an expression of solidarity in number 2296. Medical research, generally care has to be done with animals first before you go into other things. But that takes us a little far away from what we have to eventually come and put our minds on. Turning to mental illness as a problem for medical moral theologians, the reality can be divided into two different kinds: emotional blockage due to psychological causes, and then major chemical problems within the brain, and then both psychological and mental brain problems. Okay? One facet of the problem is called a neurosis, mostly psychological. The other is called psychosis. The latter is further broken down into manic depression, bipolar problems, and worst of all, schizophrenia. Though if you have to care for any of these people, the one you have to take care of them seems to be the worst. Psychotropic drugs are standard medications given to calm patients of both neurosis and psychosis, so that, at least for the neurotics, psychotherapy with a professional doctor and therapist can slowly talk them through their anxieties and bring them hopefully to certain forms of resolution. It's an art. So it might take a year, might take 2 years, but it's kind of necessary to be able to develop good understanding of why you feel certain fears or have certain angers and certain things that go way back to your past. That's different from somebody who's just has a brain illness, Sometimes someone can look like they have schizophrenia. My mother, for example, one time she was under medical supervision for her depressions and drove my father. My father lived a very heroic life taking care of her. But I remember one time when I came home from Rome, I walked to say hello to Mom, and we had a dinner, and then after dinner she cried, and we had to put her to bed, and then about an hour later, "Burr Charles, I want to talk to you." And my first name is Burr, and she named me Burr. "Burr Charles, I want to talk to you." I said, "Well, what's that, Mom?" "Well, I am just discouraged and depressed, and I can't believe this, but I don't want you to get married. You're a priest." And I said, "Mom, nobody would have me in the first place. I'm too old, and I do have wrinkles, I have white hair, etc." She wouldn't take that for an answer. She just kept going on and on and on. So I called her doctor, not a psychiatrist, but I put her into a psychiatric treatment center. So I did. It took me 10 hours to do it. And so when I visited her on a Monday, this was a Sunday night, and there were nurses and doctors. She just sat, she was in a straitjacket, screaming at me, yelling at me, "You're a rotten priest. You're a terrible son. You're this. You're yeah." I know, Mother. I know. I just let her go on and on and on. "Well, I'll see you Wednesday, Mom." So I come back Wednesday, and she's as normal as they come. The doctor had assured me on Tuesday I'd have to put her into psychiatric treatment. See? A psychiatric hospital for the rest of her life. And then here she is Wednesday, kind of normal again. What happened? She was over-medicated with then was called Elavil. She was taking 700 milligrams or 500 milligrams. But the doctor didn't know any better. He was a regular GP, He just didn't know. And he had been friends with my mom over the years. She had worked as a nurse with him many, many years ago and all the rest of it, you see. So now when this comes, let's say you're taking care of a psychiatric patient or even somebody that's massively depressed, etc., and then they develop cancer and have a few other things, you're facing two different problems at the same time that require deep thought on your part with counseling with the doctor. Is what's the best kind of care? And maybe all you can do is give comfort care. Exceptional care, just keep them alive for its own sake, well, that doesn't make much sense, because if comfort care isn't working and keeping them kind of stable, then that must mean that she or he is slowly dying. Well, then if they're slowly dying, going in for more exceptional, extraordinary care makes no sense. What you're doing is you're prolonging the dying process, and you're prolonging a lot of pain at the same time, see? But now if a person is not in the dying process, well, they're owed ordinary care. And that's why sometimes some people, doctors, some hospitals like to sort of scare you into saying they'll be dead tomorrow, or we don't really have to keep them alive because they'll be dead in the morning, so we'll pull the plugs now. That means the hospital is acting as an agent causing death, as distinct from pulling them when you're already dying in an imminent sort of a way. See? And these are cases that are complex in every situation that comes, but I'm just giving you this one difficult example if you have to take care of somebody who's enduring psychiatric or psychological problems besides having a very serious medical problem. I remember when I was in England, I was going to give a retreat there, and they phoned me up at the Dominican house on Cambridge, and the prior came to me. "You got a phone call." And so from the United States, it was the doctor. He says, "Look, your mother broke her collarbone. If we don't operate on her, she'll be in constant pain, and we'll have to just give her pain medication. Or we could operate on her. The chances are she may not pull through the operation, but if she does, she'll be able to live better. She'll be able to endure a lot more." And sure enough, I said, "Well, let's take the risk. Let's have the operation." It was a great success. For 4 wonderful days, she had a great happiness in life, and then suddenly on a Saturday, she died, just like that. She was 93 years old. She wasn't 43. All right. So, having made those little distinctions, the lifetime plight of these sufferers can be a continual and great temptation to go off their medications and then seek release in hard drugs and other kinds of chemical dependency. That is to say, if you're taking care of somebody who's going to have schizophrenia and then also develops cancer or develops something else, you've got a double whammy. People who are addicted to other things will have the same problems. There are other moral problems or perplexities in this field of medical moral theology, which in the time being, Mother Church hasn't always been able to come up with a solution. So these are things that the Church hasn't answered yet, but theologians have. They argue on both sides. See? Is total brain death truly measurable? And is there a true criterion for determining brain death? That's a very, very difficult subject. There's some places will go through 25 different tests, and in some countries it's partial brain death. The Pope said total brain death is okay, to accept that as a criterion for death, and then you could take their organs if they wish to give them. But the problem today is the dispute now is there such a thing as total brain death even then? Because there have been cases of people with total brain death are still working alive, are still alive, And so if you start assuming you can go in and take their organs, you're killing them, you see, directly. That's the issue here with that particular problem. What about the problem of a fertilized egg that's in the tubal area of the woman, a tubal pregnancy? What can you do? Well, the blastosphere belongs to the mother, the child, or both. Well, if the operation takes the whole tube out to save the life of the mother, because she might die, the baby will die. That's an indirect killing, not a direct killing. You're taking the part for the sake of the mother. You're not immediately killing the child. You're removing a situation that's killing her, namely a tube with a child that keeps growing and eventually burst of all kinds of problems and kill her, you see? And then there are also drugs that can do something similar, but sometimes they might directly kill the embryo. Craniotomy, still prohibited by the church, to basically go in and chop the baby's head up to save the life of the mother. That's very clear in the teaching of the church. Okay? When it comes down then to the question of pulling the plug on somebody who is very seriously ill, one has to be reasonably certain that the person is in the process of dying. Quite close. Not in 6 months, not in a month, no, slowly. You can't, because what would happen is you pull the plug, you're actually killing the person. The plug that gives nutrients, even oxygen, and the rest. It's a prudential, moral decision that requires good, solid theological principles, and quite often, some hospitals, not all, will want to get rid of the patient as soon as possible so that they can get another patient to put in that bed that's of greater need. So that's why we have to keep in mind, even though this is a 45-minute conference and you probably haven't remembered more than 5% of what I've said, still you can see that what we try to do in the Catholic Church is show a respect for human life till death. And when people start saying that somebody's dying, we want to be sure they're dying. We don't want to just get somebody off-the-cuff opinion. We want to have some evidence, you see? And when somebody is really sincerely going through the death, well, that's different, because what can happen is continuing to give them medication, continuing to give them oxygen, continuing to do that, you're actually prolonging their dying and probably creating more pain in the long run, see? But that's a difficult decision, and each person, each case is different. Thank you very much for your time. I hope this has been of some value, and again, I'm not an infallible teacher of the church. I just try to do what I think is the truth. Any questions?
You're just a master of sacred theology.
Oh, shut up. I can do that. I can do my former student.
So we have some time for questions, Yeah, I'll take the mic around and.
Father, could you discuss the issues surrounding heart transplants?
I am not a doctor, but looking at it from the point of view of morals, it requires, obviously, a lot of tests, blood tests, as well as testing the heart itself, you see, that somebody is donating in their death, see, and given the right medical evaluations, it seems very certain that it can be of value to the person that has a poor heart, and this other person is dead, you know, and the heart was kept alive somehow, and it was kept from deteriorating, you know, then obviously that's a reasonable thing to do. However, it's very expensive, and it may not be covered by insurance today. Maybe tomorrow, well, there may be no insurance, but anyway, that's another problem. So one has to keep in mind that money has some place to do in determining what's ordinary or proportionate care, you know, and so that's going to be a big, heavy hit. If I'm a millionaire or a multimillionaire, maybe that would be a great thing for me to happen to me. I can pay for it, and maybe I can help the family of the person who's dead, you know. But I can't take a living person and kill him in order to pay him. But that would be that's not in the cards here. I hope that gives you a little insight.
Another question. All right.
Father, I understand about the transferring of organs from human to human, but now they're doing animal to human, such as the pig,
Yes.
you know, to the human and so on. What is the judgment on that?
Well, most theologians would say, given due testing, etc., some organs, some parts of organs can be put back into the person. Sexual, no, because that transcends the whole issue. If I looked at it merely philosophically, merely from the point of view of reason, I might be able to come up with something like that. But those of us who have faith, as well as reason, realizes that the sexual has something much more profound than the heart, because it's the transmission of human life to another human being. Okay, but getting back to your thing, they use a lot of organs now in operations from animals. Not many, but there's some things that can be done and quite helpful. I have never gotten involved in examining all the various and sundry aspects of it, but we can say in principle, given proper research, given properly testing, then certain things can be done to the human person using human organs. But it's very difficult because you have different blood types, you have all kinds of other problems and also that might keep you alive for a while, but you might have to take a lot of drugs, and that again might have other deleterious consequences, as distinct from, say, a small aspect of an animal. That's the best I can offer you right now. Yeah.
This has probably been discussed a lot. What is your take on the IVF issue of I'm not sure.
In vitro fertilization.
Right. I mean, if some of the babies are going to be killed in order for the family to have a baby, what's the church's take on that?
Well, start off with, you already know, you're killing an innocent human being to save it. No, you can't do that. Okay. The real problem, though, of in vitro fertilization is actually storing fetuses. They have a right to be implanted in their mother's womb, and that right is gravely violated because they're frozen. And then to unfreeze them, quite often can kill them. And then, I mean, they're getting whacked. Their rights are violated, something terrible, both by the parents who allow that to happen, as well as hospitals that do that, and then people who cooperate in doing all of that. That's the real evil, is, killing them. Okay. Now, would it be wrong for a Catholic girl to save the life of an in vitro of a frozen embryo, to offer her womb for the sake of keeping that, allowing that child to flourish, to come alive, to be born? Church hasn't answered, but I'd say a majority of theologians that I've read, even though I had a doctoral dissertation, a man write a doctoral dissertation on me, he passed, and he maintained that was morally good, even though there was an official from the Congregation of Doctrine and Faith who was on the board, and he also agreed that the author my student had done a very fine job. He's now pastor somewhere here in Ohio. I think it's Ohio anyway. So anyway, what happens is offering yourself as a womb to save a human life is a heroic act, especially if you're not married. When if you are married, then you have to have the consent of your husband, and both of you have to agree to that. And the chances of that child living in your womb isn't all that great. And sometimes in the secular world, they'll give 2 or 3 into the womb, knowing probably 2 will die. But that doesn't always happen. Sometimes they have triplets, see? If the motivation is to save the human's life and to raise it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, a whole sector of theologians would agree. Another sector of theologians would disagree and say, no, you're not allowed to interfere with the ordinary communication of life, namely conjugal acts. This is not a conjugal act. The other side would say, yeah, it's not a conjugal act, but the desire, the gift of life would seem to be able to not get rid of that, but somehow that to be able to save a life that could go into heaven would seem to trump that other principle right now. And then they go back and forth. I'm just giving you the brief little argument. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. And I remember I had 2 brilliant students in my class one time. One's now pastor in San Francisco at St. Dominic's. The other is a professor in the Philippines. And they argued for an hour against each other. And of course, at the end of the time, I said, well, you're both right. The church hasn't decided where the truth is. And I, as a teacher at that time, I didn't lean one way or the other. I just didn't know. As I got older, I kind of leaned towards the one that gives life, that can save a life, even though it bypasses the conjugal act. Yet the conjugal act is an act, a positive law of marriage, and a positive law can admit of exceptions. But anyway, we could go on. I mean, it's like playing a ping pong, going back and forth. And it's a good argument. And my 2 students, they were young. They didn't get mad at each other. They didn't yell at each other. They just, they were very, very polite to each other, and they were both brilliant. The guy that's pastor at St. Dominic's, he should have gone on for a doctorate. I tell him you're crazy, but he wanted to be he wanted to do parish work, and St. Dominic's is flourishing in San Francisco because of it. But that goes beyond.
We want a question over here.
So the question is, Father, and I've seen this a couple times, someone who's kind of at the end of their normal lifespan, so someone who's 92, 95, for example.
Yep.
They're in hospice, their health's declining. At some point in time, they become unconscious and can't actively take in food or water anymore.
That is correct.
Typically, hospice will give them palliative care.
That's right.
But they won't necessarily provide food or water by different means, whether it be an IV, feeding tube, etc.
That would
what
mean
would
then,
that case be?
that would mean then that they're in the state of dying. So you're letting them die, okay? Now, if they can in fact stay alive with hydration, then you've got to hydrate them according to the Pope, you know? You can't kill a person, but you can let a person die. There's a big distinction. You know, that's the only way you can use the theological principle.
One over here.
Father, where you mentioned there's a degree of relativity given different states of life and conditions, where there's a growing movement for someone who may be destitute, homeless, multiple chronic health conditions, addiction, psychiatric conditions, the whole gamut, an increased attraction to let's hasten their death, which seems to be coming with drugs. So how do we answer where there is a degree of relativity with this? How do we distinguish euthanasia in a really chronic case like that versus easing someone's passing?
Well, given the circumstances that you outlined, we assume that the state takes over the care of that particular person, right? Okay. Then the state has to decide if morally speaking, well, are they dying or do they have some life? And so therefore, they have to try to wean them off of their drugs and have to try to, try to do what they can to give them comfort care, proportionate comfort care. And that's different from this circumstance, say from me, who may just have a bad heart, and I'm sitting there and occasionally feel lousy, but I can still eat, I can still drink, I don't have to, I can still breathe on my own, you see. Well, in this particular case, it sounds like the person is deliberately trying to commit suicide as well. But if the state intervenes, and if the state doesn't intervene, he will kill himself. But if the state intervenes properly, in the ideal world, then they've got to try to get him off of these things and at least give him comfort care, proportionate care to stay alive. And then if he refuses all that stuff and throws it out, et cetera, and doesn't cooperate, there's not much they can do except to let him die. That's about all you can do. You can't strip him down and keep him alive. It just won't. That causes other problems too. So some people just want to commit suicide, and they're hard to detect. A lot of suicides are hard to detect. I mean, I had a classmate. Nobody thought he'd commit suicide. He was always cheerful, always happy, a success. Girls loved him. He was a great basketball player, and then he hung himself. Nobody knew what was going on, But then you got this case here. He just simply is killing himself, and there's nothing you can do.
Couple more questions.
Very briefly, Father,
That's my middle name.
you're a visitor, Dominican, and I would have you know that we feel very blessed with the Dominican entourage,
That's
beginning
because
with our pastor, Father Paul, here at St. Patrick. And I speak, I'm sure, for all 7 or 8 or 9 of them who
That's
have
because
been
I taught
with
most
us
of them.
the last
Believe me, it wasn't just me.
So, do know, and wherever you go, let it be known that
I know.
we feel blessed. Number 2, very, very briefly, what drew you to the Dominican order, or just a couple minutes of your background, what brought you on board?
Well, what brought me on board was the thought that I went to Jesuit schools, and Jesuit school, St. Ignatius in U.S. University, San Francisco, and I felt called to be a priest, but a little bit, but not a Jesuit. Just something I didn't like about the Jesuits. That was me. And then I discovered the Trappist monks. They were up in Vina, California, and I was just overwhelmed. I never met priests like this before in my life, and And the more I thought of it, I say, I love these guys, but I'd be a terrible Trappist. I'm not a farmer. I'm a thinker. So what am I going to do? So I figured, well, maybe I'll become a Benedictine. It's the same order in a way. It's the rule of St. Benedict. So I went to Mount Angel, and I wound up playing the piano for the prison in Oregon there. I forget where, near, I forget the name of the city. Anyway, the priest that was in charge was an old buckaroo Dominican. And he got me thinking a little bit, but he didn't influence me, but he got, there he was. And then I was reading a book criticizing all the religious orders, really going after them. And when it came time for the Dominicans, I said, well, they have these problems, all right. They're trying to do too damn much, first of all. But I kind of think maybe that's where I would fit. And that's what did it. And then I entered the novitiate and hated the novitiate. And then I became a student and hated the student date. And for 2 years, it was awful. And then in my third year, bloop, I was at home. But all the time, I knew this is what God wanted me to do, even though it was awful. It was awful, terrible, miserable. And that's because of me. I was a musician, independent, super filled with self. So I had to die. And boy, did I die. I couldn't stand my classmates. I used to use the cursing psalms thinking about them. And because we used to have the cursing psalms in the old breviary. And then I realized, wait a minute, this is not right, So that's what happened. And I'd do it all over again. I joined the Dominicans out west and worked for 25 years, and I'd come out east when they needed me as a professor, and so that's. Glad to have you here, Father. Thank you.
You've been ordained 59 years this
year?
Yep,
I'll be 60 in a year and a half.
So, all right, last question.
Thank you. If the result would be the same, is there a difference between withholding treatment versus withdrawing for somebody if the result's going to be the same? Is there any kind of viewpoint of that? Sometimes that's what people struggle with. Do I not give a treatment, result's going to be the same, versus put them on the treatment and then stop it because the result would be the same? Just
well, there are two different issues there. Sometimes you withhold the treatment because the person will experience pain or terrible discomfort. It might be the best treatment in the world, but for him, it's, take it away. Okay, so you have to withdraw it. On the other hand, if he's not conscious, then the instruments would say this is not working, that judges a person's health, etc. On the other hand, if you're alive and you're taking the treatment and it's working, and then all of a sudden it's going downhill, then obviously you have to withdraw the treatment, and he has to be willing to let it withdraw, especially if it's having deleterious consequences. So it comes down to the idea of pain. How much can he endure? Is this working? Is this not working? And is it proportionate to his desires and wishes, or is it disproportionate? And if he's conscious, he can answer that. If he's not conscious, then you've got to make an educated guess based upon your knowledge of the person you're taking care of, and then using the instruments. That's where that comes in, that idea. When I said relative, it's kind of, it's relative. Should I marry Sue or should I marry Judy? That's a relative question. I've got to make up my mind. Maybe I should marry both of them. Maybe I should marry either of them. Maybe I should become a priest. I hope that begins to answer the question.
Let us thank Father Basil Cole for tonight's second annual Aquinas Lecture.
And let's end with a prayer.